Hello and welcome to the Middle School Bookmarker Show. I'm Chris.
And I'm Brianna. We're teachers reading this middle school novel for the very first time. We hope you'll read it along with us and then listen to our conversation about it.
This week we're covering Schooled by Gordon Korman, and we just read chapters 15 and 16. If you haven't read them yet, go read them now.
Oh, and by the way, we're going to get this whole show wrapped up in just 11 minutes, because 11 minutes is all you need to
get out of your first period science quiz because you're tie-dyeing your dirty gym socks with the class president.
We're back to Hugh in this chapter, and it's a pretty short chapter. It's only a couple of pages. But he's talking about how he has kind of become Cap's best friend, and everyone talks about him now as Cap's best friend instead of just, oh, there's that loser kid Hugh.
Yeah, it's pretty refreshing for him to be associated with a friend instead of just being kind of the nerdy kid that everybody picks on. So Hugh tries to extend their friendship and hang out outside of school, but he has some troubles. He offers to say, hey, man, you want to come do chess club? And Capricorn doesn't like the competition in chess. He says, do you want to go hang out at my place? And he gets shot down there. I think the mall is about to be suggested, and that's when Cap counters with an idea.
Yeah, so I think Hugh asked Cap where he bought his shirt, and then Cap's like, oh, I tie-dyed it. And Hugh's like, oh, great, so we're not going to the mall. But then Cap says, do you want me to teach you how to tie-dye?
Which sets this huge chain of events that kind of like, it might be the defining event of Cap's 8th grade presidency. They sneak into the art room, which, remember a couple of chapters ago when I was saying, like, how is it that these kids can just go wherever they want all the time? Well, that's kind of addressed here. They sneak into the art room in the morning, they start tie-dyeing, and suddenly the art teacher pops in.
Mm-hmm. The art teacher comes in and starts yelling at them because they're just using materials in her art room. But then she sees that they're tie-dyeing and gets all excited because she hasn't done it since college. And so she decides that she's going to join in with them and actually change it so that her first period class is doing tie-dye instead of whatever else they had planned.
Mm-hmm. And she even at some point calls down to the office to get Cap and Hugh out of their first period class to let them continue helping tie-dye. But the announcement doesn't end there. They then say, hey, anybody that wants to come tie-dye with your class president, run and get your gym socks, run and get your gym shirt, whatever you got in the locker that can accept dye, come on down.
Yeah, so it really becomes this big thing where Cap is like almost leading this like tie-dye movement at the school. And I think at some point Hugh mentions how 95% of the kids that show up to this tie-dye extravaganza come up and talk to him.
And they're asking about the Mr. Rodrigo bus heart attack incident. They're talking about the upcoming dance and a couple other things. Cap's really getting a really good chance here to meet people for the first time, and he's learning all their names and he's writing all their names down because that's what he thinks a good president is supposed to do. You wanna dial in on this quote at the end of the chapter? Read it off.
Yeah.
So Hugh's observing this whole crazy thing, and he has this thought. This is the very end of the chapter. She sees Cap getting all the high fives, which might explain why I almost didn't notice something else that was different about today. There wasn't a single spitball lodged in Cap Anderson's hair. Not one.
Yeah, so I mean, just a few chapters ago, we were having issues with spitballs flying towards Cap's hair and getting stuck in it, and it hasn't been very long that he's been at the school, and already things are changing. He's gaining more people on his side, more people who want to get to know him, be friends with him, and so for the bullying, in a sense, to at least slow down, if not stop completely in this chapter, is a big turning point, I think.
Absolutely. It was... You got to think about, authors make really intentional choices, and we've already talked about how good of an author we think that Gordon Korman is. He ends this chapter with this quote, I think, to leave a breadcrumb. The author doesn't explicitly, directly tell you how things are changing, but the way that is left, that little quote there, and the way kind of Hugh leaves you to continue your own thoughts about it, I think the author wants us to make an inference. Brianna, are you making an inference about how all these different things that Cap is doing is affecting his perception or the perception of him?
Yeah, I think people are starting to realize that maybe different isn't as bad as they expected it to be, because they're learning more about who he is, and they see that he actually cares about their interests. Mm-hmm. And I think that they haven't had somebody who's cared about their interests before because they've been so focused on just this whole gag of the loser is the class president.
Yeah.
So I think it's a new world for everybody, and they're kind of getting schooled in a sense.
Yeah, like we predicted. So the author, it's kind of like that trail of breadcrumbs we talked about before. The author leaves all these hints and doesn't tell you, but the breadcrumbs are supposed to lead you on a path towards an inference. You're supposed to try to figure it out on your own. Brianna, we didn't plan on an English class stuff, but there is one right there, English class stuff. And let's pop over to the next chapter. We're back with Capricorn in chapter 16. Oh, by the way, the secret word is responsible. So Cap comes home one day after school to see Mrs. Donnelly is home early, and by the time he gets in the house, he finds out that Sophie is really upset. So he goes to console Sophie, and how does Sophie respond, Brianna?
Sophie basically screams at Cap to mind his own business and get away, and Cap he kind of doesn't know what to do because he doesn't realize that he did anything wrong.
And they've been getting along pretty well, too.
Yeah, he doesn't realize that he's kind of invading her privacy in this conversation, especially because it turns out to be about her dad.
It's not good news. Ms. Donnelly had quietly in her own head predicted it, that her ex-husband was going to just up and leave again. Apparently this is his MO. He just shows up, gets everybody's hopes up, and then leaves. So for Sophie, this is devastating, of course, because it's her dad. But beyond that, think about the driving lessons, the driving test. Think about the bracelet that he took back and promised he was going to give back engraved. I feel really terrible for Sophie.
I do too. I mean, she's going through so much, having a new kid living in her house who is very, very different from everyone she's grown up with, and then dealing with this with her dad. And even though it's a regular occurrence, especially at a time where you're about to get your driver's license, that's a big time in a kid's life. And important. You know, it's really sad that it's right around her like a belated birthday present, and it's too much give and take for somebody to take.
And so that leads to the next chapter where maybe it's the next day or the day after, and Cap, or not next chapter, next part, where Cap and Sophie are sitting and watching Trigonometry in Tears, like they do very often, but they get into kind of a disagreement about this character named Rashawn. Rashawn has a major important test coming up that's important for college admission. Rashawn is not taking the test very seriously, and Sophie doesn't really care. Cap is really upset for Rashawn. I think that there's a little bit of irony in right here, because coming off of the previous scene, I was really upset with Sophie, or upset for Sophie, because she was just devastated for her father. Interestingly, the next scene, Sophie is talking about how she doesn't really care for this fake fictional character. And I just kind of, in that moment, stopped and thought like, wow, I actually feel bad for this character right now. And now inside the book, the character that I feel bad for is talking about how she doesn't feel bad for characters. So if I ever get the chance to ask Gordon Korman, I'm going to ask him, did you intentionally do that? Did you set me up to feel bad for this character? And then immediately have the character say, oh, don't care about that character. It's just a fake TV show. And while it is a fake TV show to Sophia, and it is actually a fake TV show, Cap's response is a little bit different.
Yeah, so Cap just starts thinking about the dance again and kind of making connections to how this TV show relates to his situation in public school and planning the dance. And he starts talking about tomato plants and how Rain has always said, if you plant tomato seeds, you'll get tomato plants. But he's realizing that he's getting other people to do work for him, and it's kind of working out in his favor, despite him not really doing any of the work.
And so he says he sees that Rashawn is not prepping for the test, like he is not prepping for the dance. But, like, yeah, that seeds thing, I love that little analogy right there. Sometimes, he says, it seems like in this complex real world, you don't have to actually plant the tomato seeds, and sometimes you get tomatoes anyway.
Yeah, so the end of this chapter... We are crunched on time.
We got a minute left.
We are. So the end of this chapter, just to wrap up a little bit, Cap runs into Mr. Kasigi asking about a budget for the dance, and Cap has no idea what that means. So Mr. Kasigi takes him to the bank and gets him a checkbook to use for the dance, so he can write checks to the different people, like the food and the music. And
Cap thinks the bank is disgusting. He hates it.
Yeah.
He wants to get out of there. He says that money's all that's important here, and I want to get out of here because that he's learned that that's a bad thing.
Right. So he walks home or back to Miss Donnelly's place from the bank, and he sees something in the window on the way back. He actually sees the bracelet with the gemstones that Sophie's dad was trying to give her the last time we saw him.
And we didn't mention that as they were leaving the bank, Kasigi had signed off on checks before they left, which as soon as you sign a check, it can be used and you can write in unique amounts. So Kasigi had basically handed you can spend this on whatever you want to Cap. Cap sees the bracelet. He decides, at $175, I'm going to do this because he remembers this quote about how Rain always said, if you can make people happy, you should make people happy. It's the responsible thing to do. And Kasigi told him to be responsible, so now he's in this situation where he thinks it's a good idea to buy that bracelet out of the window instead of funding the dance. Brianna, you want to bring us home?
Yep, so that's the end of the chapter. If you enjoyed this, hit like, ring the bell, and subscribe, and we're reading chapters 17 and 18 next time.
All right, guys, we will see you later.